Well, thank you all for joining us. The Columbian Editorial Board is pleased to meet with Republican House Representatives. And we have Brandon Vick, Paul Harris, Vicki Kraft. Thank you all for joining us. We're just going to go over the legislative session, which recently concluded, try and get some thoughts and where we go from here. And as you know, I'm Greg Jane, editorial page editor, and Craig Graham, the managing editor of the paper, and member of the editorial board. We are videotaping this. You've all been here before. You should know that. We will post it unedited on our website for the benefit of our readers. And just so you know, reporter Jake Thomas is sitting in, and he might want to speak with you afterwards. So anyway, let's get started. It was a very busy session. Kind of, what are the things that stand out? What would you say are the biggest successes from your point of view? And we'll start with Vicki.
McCleary has been decided, and a solution is in place.
And sorry to interrupt, but are you confident that that will meet the mandate?
I believe it will, and a lot of bipartisan negotiated discussions went into that conversation, obviously, because one of the biggest objectives was certainly to fully fund basic education. That's obviously a mandate, but most importantly, beyond that, was to make sure we didn't have to come back and have this conversation in the next few years.
And are you confident that that was achieved?
I believe it was, absolutely. I mean, the biggest piece around that really was the local levy aspect, because, right, that was where the Supreme Court said, hey, look, local levies, you can't rely on local levy funds to fund basic education. So that was the piece that had to really get figured out, and that's the piece that was addressed. And the good news is now we have equity across the state for certainly our students, our teachers, and our school districts. So we're in a great place.
Paul, what are your thoughts on the budget and the McCleary? Do you think that mandate was...
Yeah, so I sat on the McCleary task force and helped negotiate it, and I think it's... I think everything that Vicki said was accurate, except for the one holdup is we have $1 billion sitting in the capital budget that goes to new school construction, and then without that, honestly, I haven't met my McCleary obligation. And so I am one that really thinks we need to go back into session here fairly soon, or I don't know if the court will call us back. They could. They might. So that's my only concern. But I think long term, we've actually, the McCleary decision actually does, I believe, fix what the court wanted. The Article 9 meeting went really well, and the briefing of how they're going to present it to the court, I believe that we will meet their needs. I do, though, have concerns with the capital budget and the Hearst decision that are sitting there that I believe need to be solidified, and then I think we'll be completely done.
Now, and real quick, just procedurally, could the court call you guys back into session, or is that only the governor?
I believe they could call us in contempt, and they could make our lives pretty tough.
Sure.
I mean, if they... it wouldn't take a lot for Rep. Harris to go back into session if I have a Hearst fixed and if I have a capital budget fixed. If the court called me back and I figured, and we had those two things figured out, I absolutely would welcome driving up the 110 miles to Olympia and get it done.
And we will get into the Hearst and the capital budget later. Brandon, quick thoughts?
Yeah, well, I don't think the court has the authority to actually call us back, but like Paul said, they can make our lives difficult, and the governor could indeed make that decision. I think this absolutely solves the McCleary decision. I mean, we were supposed to fund teacher contracts or teacher salaries, diesel, materials, supplies. I mean, all those things that are basic education, we will have funded. The classroom construction has to come into play with the capital budget, and we want to get there. I mean, we not only have school projects, we have projects all over that we fought hard for, we're going to win, and we need to get in there and do that. The local levy is going to be left for enhancements. If you want your school to excel in robotics, run the levy, do the robotics program. If you want Future Farmers of America or CTE or something to be your focus, that's what local levies are for. So I don't know how the court with a straight face could say we did not achieve what we need to achieve. Every school will have fully funded teachers and counselors and principals and PE and whatever the heck else is in that core curriculum. So I think as far as fully funding it, absolutely, that's done.
No, and I think we've been talking about this for years, but it is still very confusing to the average person. What will this mean for the average homeowner and taxpayer? How is that going to work? Will there be some overlap of the state increase in property tax? Will it take a year or two for local levies to go down? How will that work for your basic?
So
home?
next year's the year where we have the cross of the two.
Okay.
And locally, all of our areas will be a little different, but I think in general they all goes up slightly, and then they will go down rather significantly for about 4 or 5 years. It'll
And
take
that's
about
as local school levies drop off, or
the replacement. They take the local levy that the voters have passed
Right.
and swap it out with the state property tax of $2.70, uniform throughout the state, and the transition is a little iffy, but that's next year, and so it's just the way the school years fall. I've had I've had several people who just cannot believe that actually the government will actually lower anything, and they do not believe that their property taxes are actually going to go down, and I vehemently have showed them the materials, but they actually will. They will.
Yeah, so I have the, I guess, privilege of representing all the school districts in Clark County to some degree. And we did the math, and with the exception of Richfield and Green Mountain, everyone's going to see their rate go down significantly in 2019. You do bump up 81 cents per thousand next year, but we have school districts right now, their local levies are $3.66, $3.50, and that's going to back off to $1.50. So you can see the net change there. Richfield's going to go up, a few cents per thousand, and Green Mountain's in that same ballpark. But every taxpayer in a $250,000 house compared to a $250,000 house is going to pay the same thing for education, and I think that's what we wanted to see, and that's what equity looks like. Moving forward, people are going to get their tax bills, and they might say, Paul and Brandon and Vicki said my taxes were going down, but my bill's higher. Well, we're increasing by 10% value every year on our real estate right now. So dollar for dollar, levy rate to levy rate, absolutely it's going to go down. If our house is appreciated 25%, that is what it is too. But if you're looking at that dollar to dollar ratio, we're coming out smelling pretty good on this one.
Yeah, and the amount of funding that goes to the school districts, right, that's increased significantly. So depending on which school district you're looking at, at least double, some cases up to, quadruple potentially in our area. Those are the numbers that I've seen. So and that's over several years, that's not next year. But when you look at that, coming into the 2021 timeframe, you're easily up over 2.9 billion, that our school districts are going to be seeing. So that's significant. And, so again, when you go back to did we get there with McCleary? There were a lot of different factors that had to be dealt with. And I think, from a equity standpoint, we hit all the nails right on the head.
You look at what we went into session, what was being looked at as far as taxes that were proposed by the Democrats. I think this is far more equitable and far more reasonable conclusion of how to fund education and to make it fair for everyone.
And I don't think it should be overlooked. There was 8 legislators working on this thing every day, and that was Paul and Representative Taylor from our caucus. And those guys' job was amazing. I deal with numbers and insurance and those type of things on a daily basis. But to get this done, I think Paul and the team deserve a big round of kudos.
Mm-hmm. Along those lines, though, can you understand there's some frustration out there with the process and how long this took, not only in this session, but shouldn't this have been figured out starting in 2012?
I think it's really hard when you get into session. There's so many things that take up your time, committees, looking at bills. And I got to be honest with you, it was 2 months of 8 of us full-time every day going in and hashing this. I don't have that time in session. I really don't. And so could have it been done earlier? Absolutely, it could have been. I look at this as kind of like in high school, and honestly, until the day comes where some of us would study for our tests months in advance. There's not many, but I got to be honest with you. Sure, it could have been done. It wasn't. We got it done when we had to do it. When we were at the final, I hate to say it, but we were there and we met what the court wanted, and it's done. And I think it's actually very good legislation, good policy.
I think it is worth noting too, this group started meeting prior to session.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it was, when we were in interim last year and in campaign mode, these guys were still meeting and working it out. So definitely urgency hit at the very end, but this is a monumental change, and I think it took a long time to get to the right solution.
I'm a little confused about two parts. So number one is, when will the court when do you expect the court to say that the McCleary solution is acceptable? And I guess the second piece follows up a little on what you mentioned earlier about the capital budget. Would the court possibly say no capital budget, no approval, no lifting of the contempt of court order, or is that just something that has to be done because schools need to be built?
Well, I don't want to speak for I believe that it's, if we don't get called back, then this will be handled probably either during committee days in November. Or it could be handled, one of the first things. I don't think any of us want to be in contempt. I don't think any of us want to hold up our school construction. So I don't see that it's something that's not going to get handled, and rather fast.
And I don't know that the court has set a date.
They have, and
Okay.
shame on me. I don't know. That's why the Article 9 meeting met, and all that work's done. I believe it's either in September or October they're going to have a hearing, and I should know, and I'm sorry I don't.
It was probably in that, there was a story that when that meeting was held, and I can't remember what it said.
In the many things that
We're
are
on
in
the
my
same
head,
boat.
I don't remember the date, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But there is a date set, and
In the
it's
fall.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thanks.
And now, we talked about the capital budget, which, if I remember correctly, that was held up in the Senate. There was a dispute. Some Republican senators wanted a solution to the Hearst ruling on water rights, so they declined to consider the capital budget. And is that accurate so far?
Well, I was going to say, that's one aspect, but you also have to remember there was a point where, yes, okay, because of the importance of Hearst and
Sure.
water, right, for rural folks as well as water for folks living in cities. So in an effort to try to make sure that we got both important bills addressed, which had not been addressed, all session long by the House yet, on the Hearst bill, the Senate said, hey, we really need to do this. And so that's really what that was, as far as, holding that capital budget. And unfortunately, there was at one point a bipartisan Hearst bill, an amendment, a Stryker amendment, that had been put together and was ready to run. And the House Democrats did not run that. And so it's unfortunate because that bill likely would have had support on both sides of the aisle to pass. And so, that was the opportunity that was missed.
So what's the next step? Where does it go from here?
Well, we've been talking to our senators regularly, and they're still trying to negotiate the heck out of this thing. The reason I think this happened the way it is because there's really one budget that has leverage. The operating budget is 50% plus one. Transportation is 50% plus one. Capital budget, the budget's 50% plus one, but the funding mechanism, the bonds, that takes a 60% vote. So you need a lot of people at the table in agreement to get this thing off the ground. I think half of the capital budget is cash, half is bonds, or some close number like that. So I think that's really the leverage point. I think the easy talking point on this is, why should we let government go ahead and build a park or community center when the neighbor to that park or community center can't build their house? That's really what we're getting at here. This is a very basic property right. I serve on I'm the ranking member on the Business and Financial Services Committee. That's banking and insurance. And we're hearing daily about banks that are not lending on properties that did not have a permitted well before October of 2016. I mean, property values are in the tank here, and I don't know that Washington can create its own, banking collapse, but this is serious stuff. I mean, these portfolios are worth nothing. The property values are worth nothing. I know Clark County wells aren't the biggest issue we have, but you have rural Camas, Battleground, Richfield that we do have these problems in, and it's going to come home to roost. You're talking about not only a reduction in property values, but basically an elimination of property rights. I mean, congratulations, you have 20 acres you can go look at and camp on, That's a big deal we have to address. So I think they do work hand in hand. It is frustrating because we worked really hard on the capital budget as a team, Democrats and Republicans. I mean, we worked on this thing. We got great projects for Clark County, and I believe we're going to get it done. But there are some influential lobbying folks at the table opposing Hearst, and that's sad, and that's what we have to get past, or at least what the House Ds have to get past right now.
Paul, what's your best guess?
So I think I look at it like everything Brandon says is really accurate. I look at this similar to education, where we have a big issue, and I believe that there is a task force. There's people that we're negotiating that are still sitting down at the table that are trying to work out this fix, and I believe that those 8 individuals will continue to work on this, and I know that they are. Dave Taylor is one of those from our caucus again, who drew the short straw and is in that room and is working on that issue. But I really believe that they will come up with a good solution again that will meet the needs, and will get back and make a good vote.
So realistically, do you think that the negotiators, they'll find a solution for Hearst, then they can put the capital budget back on the table, then will the governor call a special session to deal with both those? Is that how it works, just logistically?
Logistically, yeah, I would, yeah.
I think people need a little time to breathe and get those sessions behind them too. But I think it has to happen. There's talk of this, 2-year fix that's been out there, and quite honestly, it doesn't work. I mean, a bank won't loan on a 2-year fix, first of all. But if you actually read the bill, which people don't tend to do, it said in order to get in order to get a well permit, you first had to have a building permit. Well, if you build houses, have built a house, that's backwards. You cannot get a building permit until you get a well permit. So even if this 2-year fixed bill would have passed, it's not practical. It doesn't work. People can't build. We need certainty here, and this isn't something that you can only fix for 2 years. You have water rights. There are senior water rights, absolutely, but these are 5,000, gallon a day wells. They're not changing the world out there. So we got to get this thing fixed, and people got to be able to build. I mean, we're not talking mansions, and you could be, but we're talking about, grandma and grandpa have 50 acres. They want to give 5 acres each kid, and the family lives out on the old farm. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, and that's really what we got to fix.
Yeah, and I also think the potential tax implications, right? I mean, it was, as we've been talking about, when property values go down in the rural communities, the revenue that comes in for counties to be able to function, those revenues are still going to be looked for. So, you have to ask yourself, okay, so how does the county deal with that? Does that tax, does that tax need shift then to the other folks left? The other thing is the burden that it puts on counties now, and I think Ann Donnelly said it well in her op-ed, that patchwork of counties trying to put together what their independent responsibility now is as a result of the Hearst decision to try to figure out adequate water levels. Well, that'll look different, and then how do you really ensure that that's taking place? So that's unfortunate for the counties to be in that position, and obviously then it comes back to homeowners and the hydrological studies that are very costly. So it is definitely something that needs to be addressed, and I'm hopeful we'll get there.
What other lingering issues are still out there that weren't effectively dealt with this year? So, Brandon.
Yeah, They weren't effectively dealt with. That probably depends on what side of the aisle you sit on. You know, I think we all talk about it. We've always talked about it. I think there's some big strides being made as to how to address the B&O system in our state. Representative McEwen and I have had a bill for a few years in a row now that gets us more to a Texas-style model. It's still a B&O tax, but you have some pretty good chances at deductions. And so whether that's payroll or inputs or things like that, it makes the B&O system more fair to the small guy, the startup, the person who's putting a lot into building their business and growing into something successful. It's always been something that's been hanging around our necks. We talk about it in every campaign.
How do you keep that from getting so complicated, though, that you got to have a tax attorney?
Well, you probably would have to have some accounting or tax attorney worked in there, but I think your federal tax returns could be used in a scenario like that. But I think that's a big issue we're still going to have to deal with. For Southwest Washington, we've got to figure out infrastructure much better. And it's probably not going to be through a tax package, or at least the appetite's not there. So how do we, not just Clark County, but those areas that have grown so rapidly that roads and sewers didn't keep up, what is the solution there? I think that's something we have to keep working on. I've proposed using a combination of increased revenues and the capital budget to get that done. That was a great idea when we passed capital budgets easily. So we'll have to keep working on things like that. But there's still stuff left on the table. The Democrats would probably say there's more left on the table. But there's nothing. We'll have stuff to do next year.
Paul, anything else jump out at you?
Well, in the capital budget, but it is how we treat the mental illness and some of that money. It still doesn't go far enough. I still think we have some issues with how we treat mental illness in our state, and actually in the United States in general.
Is that a matter of funding, or
it's a matter of funding.
process?
I think actually both, process and the governor with the mental hospital, the state mental hospital. We still have issues there. I think how we treat mental illness, which I believe it should be more local, and I believe part of the capital budget has some money for that. That to me is a significant issue that we still need to work on, but we're getting there. Once again, it's incremental steps, and we're getting there, but I think it's an important issue. It also delves into some of the homeless issue and some of the areas that we see difficulty in all communities, not just our own. So I think the opioid issue is another issue that I think that we had some legislation. It went probably too far, but I believe how we deal with opiates and abuse still needs to be worked on some more, and we need to look at that some more.
Vicki, what issues are still out there?
Well, I mean, I think one that's going to be coming probably a little more so to the forefront now that we've dealt with some of these bigger issues. I think it'll be interesting to see how healthcare comes down. Obviously, those are things that are going to be coming from federal first, and hopefully we'll see some movement there. But I think that's something certainly there'll be a big one on the table in the future. I would personally like to see more around looking at some of the business regulations and where we can make it easier. So again, back to the B&O manufacturing tax rate, lowering that 0.29 was what we were looking at, to make that level playing field. And I think one of the other things that kind of ties in with that is tourism, right? The tourism funding, there's a lot of support for the need for tourism, and we had an incentive pass this year that actually extended the film industries, opportunities to come and make it a little more competitive for them to be in Washington creating films. So when we look at tourism and all the things that we have going here, certainly in Vancouver with the waterfront projects, I think we're sitting at a really ripe time to make a strategic investment at the state level to bring back our tourism, focus, and I'll say, boost the tourism industry in Washington. We've got a phenomenal state and certainly phenomenal area here locally in Clark County. So where we can support those efforts, we need to do that. It's an amazing ROI. I don't recall the numbers right offhand, but
Yeah,
I mean,
you're right.
it's
Cities would
amazing.
advocate for I
3 to
think,
1, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right for economic development.
No, right, and did the state eliminate funding for the tourism office, or?
It was,
Okay, that's what
yeah,
I
a couple
thought.
of years
We're
ago.
the only
I
state
Right.
without a
Right.
tourism program.
Right.
But I believe, but then some private businesses got together and created a de facto.
There,
Yeah, they're-
but nothing
Nothing
formal
like-
from the state level.
yeah.
Right.
I think Vicki did bring up a good point that was buried in there, though, is we are largely reactionary on a lot of these issues based on the feds. I mean, we just saw the letter from Jeff Sessions about marijuana and kind of, hinting that I'm not done looking at this yet. And so whether it's healthcare or marijuana or mental health, or maybe we get a grant that lets us build a big construction project. I mean, there could be a lot of things out there that we just have to deal with on a moment's notice, and that's tough, because you want to research and you want to know all the ins and outs, but there could be something come January that just lands on our lap.
That was kind of my question. So
Yeah.
I think you got hurricane force winds and 40-foot waves in Washington D.C., and I'm wondering how much chop there is in Olympia from that, and how you try to deal with that. So I mean, it's sort of beyond our control here in Washington State to regulate what they're doing in Washington. But so it seems like there's probably quite a bit of like the sessions.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's going to happen with Medicare funding or Medicaid funding.
Well, and then, I don't think it was as big of a deal this year. I think this year's issues might have stemmed more from the election itself. I think you had some hurt feelings. I think you had some folks who were a little more emboldened, and I think that might have been part of the reason at least the rhetoric in the Twitter world was a little more
Dialed up,
exciting than it has been in the past. Working in the trenches, it wasn't too bad. I think Paul would say the same thing, and probably Vicki. But it is something we're going to have to deal with. I mean, if Obamacare went away tomorrow, regardless of your feelings on that, you're going to have one side that wants single-payer Washington health care, and another angle that wants it go completely private again. I mean, these are big issues we're going to deal with. We haven't had to yet, but they've been thought about, that's for sure, because it's something that is at least on the radar screen.
Yeah, right.
So I think the uncertainty does create some pluses and some minuses. I mean, complete disclosure, I have a small contract with Molina that I work with out of session. Molina is laying off a particular amount of their workforce because of the uncertainty by the federal, of the lack of certainty. So they're a private enterprise, and so what do? They go out and they look at, so what are we going to do? They're starting to lay people off because of uncertainty. But on the same token, they're going to do infrastructure. I sent a letter to to the Department of Transportation, the feds, and says, hey, if you're going to build something, hey, build me a bridge over here. I need a bridge. And, if you're going to start wheeling money around, I've got a great project for you that has, I believe, has significance. And here's where you ought to be spending some of your money. So the uncertainty, I think, can lend in both sides. And it just depends, where you're at.
Vicki, any thoughts about the seeming chaos in the other Washington? How's that impact us?
Well, I mean, I would just echo what Brandon and Paul are saying. I mean, the reality is we have a job to do here at the state level. And so for the most part, really, frankly, when we're in session, that stuff is flying, much higher than we're focused on. But as we look at next session, especially, healthier is probably, in my mind anyway, the biggest thing that is outstanding, that once that gets decided, it's kind of a ripple down effect. And I'm sure you all heard Senator Graham, right? He actually is proposing now a bill to have health care pushed down to the states. Well, if that happens, guess what? It's back in our laps, and that'll be our next, I won't call it McCleary, but it's going to be our next big
Could be somewhat
issue.
controversial.
Yeah.
Correct. We just won't have the
Big
court
issue.
holding the $100,000 a day over us, I guess.
What can you mentioned a possible bridge?
Sure.
Is there anything you guys can do to help facilitate that? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think there's a bridge commission that was voted on and
Sure.
passed. I think that will form, and I think the bridge commission will look at the I-5 bridge. It'll look at the existing bridges, and it will look at future sites of bridges. And I think once that commission starts, hopefully they can come up with some great ideas of the future of what we currently have and start addressing the issues. Yeah.
But so essentially we're where we were 17 years ago.
Probably. Well, I don't know. At least I believe that we're going to start the dialogue again and take a look at not only today but at the future. So yeah.
I think right now it's more about relationships and less about blueprints or even funding for that matter. I think it's our job to look for opportunities. And whether it's I-5, which I think is probably the most likely first opportunity, or whether it's a third bridge, when we find that hole that we can dart through and make a relationship with Oregon and the feds and get this thing done, I think that's what we obviously need to do. We all went out on a limb this year and really sat down and talked about I-5 because I think as a group in general, we thought that was the most practical way forward, if there was a way forward. In those discussions too, I think we are very cognizant of the simple math. A third bridge is going to take more cars in different directions than replacing the I-5 bridge. But what can we get done is where I keep coming back to. We have this bridge commission, and someone's going to sit on it, and they're going to have meetings. But right now, we don't know if there's going to be anyone from Oregon sitting on the other side of the
That's
table.
true.
It's the relationships that were hurt, and I'm not going to put that squarely on us because I think that on the state of Washington, because I think obviously the buy-in wasn't there from the community. But regardless of who gets the finger pointed at them, the relationships hurt, and we've got to get back. We've got to start talking. Oregon doesn't have the money to build a bridge. We probably don't have the money to build a bridge. The feds might, but they'd probably require a private partner, it's sounding like. But talking and getting on the same page is where we need to be. It's too bad we're 17 years down the road, like you mentioned. And if we get an agreement, it's going to be another 5 probably after that agreement, at least, But I think that the fact that as a team, Democrats, Republicans, community, we're sitting down and taking it seriously is something that's been needed for a while.
And you mentioned relationships. It seems like Oregon kind of threw a dagger into that by proposing tolls right at the state line on I-5 and 205. Have you guys heard from your constituents about that, or can the legislature play a role in weigh in on that?
I can tell you've heard from your constituents.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
we've heard
On
from
your faces.
Yeah.
As far as dropping a bill, that's not something that's going to have any, lasting
Right.
impact. This is where we get to be advocates, and whether it's working with Congresswoman Herrera, whether it's working directly with the Federal Department of Transportation, whether it's just getting out there and kind of raising a stink, I think that's kind of our job right now is to say a proposal like that fixes projects around Oregon, not just here at the border. That's bad for our constituents, and that's not something that we can tolerate, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Paul, you've heard from constituents?
Yeah, but go ahead, Vicki
Oh,
was
go
going
ahead.
to say something, then I'll say something.
I was just going to
So-
jump in. I think this is where the relationship part is so key because, as I came into session this year, and I was very, glad to be part of the dialogues, very thankful. I'm looking at options, right? We need solutions, just like Paul said. And so as I was having dialogue with our team members on this side of the river, I reached out to a couple other folks on the other side of the river, right? Just trying to build relationships, get some other perspective, and was thankful to have some brief conversations with, Senator Johnson, Representative Benz, Representative Bile, and looking at the possibilities and trying to figure out where are they in this process. Is anybody willing to talk at this point? Are we willing to come back and look at solutions together? I wish we would have been able to be at that point and having those, I'll call them bi-state discussions, if for no other reason, to try to have dialogue about these things like tolls, right? This is going to be an interesting path and walk forward now because, yes, we need to work together to try to come up with, bridge solutions. However, we're kind of coming at it now going, okay, well, this is great, we need to work together, but we don't like those tolls that you've just proposed. So it would have been nice to be able to maybe have some dialogue with them up front. And that's not anybody's, could have done it differently necessarily. It's just a statement to say, I think by strengthening the working relationships with Oregon, it will benefit all of us because ideally we'll be able to come together and look at solutions that really will be advantageous for both of our states and in our areas in particular. So Not that we can back up, but hopefully as we go forward, we can, have some good, candid, healthy dialogue and build those relationships.
So what kind of reaction did you get when you talked with some of the people on that side of the river?
Well, a little bit of the reality of, hey, got a little bit of hurt feelings, and
Okay.
we feel like maybe you folks walked away from the table. Don't come out with a project out of the gate at us. We have a 14-person, we as in Oregon.
Right.
They had put together, as you probably know, a 14-person transportation cadre, I'll call it, to do a listening tour around the state. And I applaud that effort. Representative Pike and myself did co-host, a town hall earlier in the year, and Representative Pike held two. That's important as a starting point, and that's where, ideally, in my mind, as a first-term legislator, I would have thought, oh, wouldn't that be great if that could have been happening on both sides of our state, and then we could have come together at that same time and shared the feedback from constituents and started working as legislators in Washington and Oregon to say, hey, what are some viable solutions here? Just like Paul said, short-term, long-term, right? So can't go back, but we are certainly looking to go forward and build a strong working relationship across the river.
Will the Bridge Commission bill, will it help do that, do you think?
I do. I think it's already started, probably raising that level of awareness on the transportation discussion over with Oregon as well. I'm not sure, I don't know what their thoughts are right now about, hey, we'd like to come and talk about the next solution versus long term. I don't know how they're viewing this. And that's where, again, just really starting to work to build those relationships is going to be important. I'm hopeful.
I think what's going to be more important than representatives sitting down at this table, though, is the professionals in the transportation world from both Washington and Oregon talking again. We literally, in our budget, haven't been able to talk to Oregon DOT for the last 2 years.
It's prohibited, right?
So that's something that I think is going to be a big deal. And you know what? As much as we might sit here and give our phenomenal ideas of which bridge is the best, when the professionals sit down and take the pen to paper, we might come up with something that we didn't think of before. And if that's the solution that has at least some sort of appeal to the legislative bodies and is financially feasible, maybe that's the one we go and jump on. And maybe Oregon calls up tomorrow and says, you know what, Gresham to Camas sounds like a great idea, let's do it. Might not happen, but we need to figure out how to react to that at that point, because that's a benefit just as well. So I think having the professionals sit down is going to be just as big, if not bigger, than having us sitting at the table talking about this stuff.
I am curious, Paul, what do you hear from your constituents about the
Well, they hate the tolls. They hate the tolls, of
Sure.
course. And they feel like it's unfair because Vicki and I probably have 30 to 50,000 people that commute into Oregon every day to work and back and forth, and they're going to pay a disproportionate amount of that fee, and it's not fair. It's the same argument that it's funny that hasn't changed. As I sat with the Oregon legislators years ago when we were discussing the I-5 bridges, I said, hey, this is simple. We're the third largest taxing paying district into the state of Oregon. Give our people a tax break. Give them a couple $1,000. It was like, what? I said, well, seriously, we don't get benefits. Come on, this is pretty much a no-brainer.
Already paying income tax.
Absolutely, paying income tax, and we, we'll feel a little of the love, but give us a little love back, man. My goodness gracious. So, but I think it's important to realize that Oregon will do what Oregon wants to do. This is what I've always said. We have our little kingdom here, and we have our tax structure and the way we think it should be run. But also remember that Oregon does too. This is why it's always difficult to decide where we're going to put the other bridge, or what bridge we're going to do first, or how we're going to fund it. We in our state have our own ideas. Even though we're twice as big as Oregon, guess what? It's their property, it's their state, and they're going to do what they want to do. And we better become friendly with them, and we better start having a dialogue with them and work these things out. But it's not our kingdom to say, hey, we don't like that I-5 bridge first. We have decided we want a third bridge and it's over here. Well, it doesn't work that way, folks. We've got to get with the other party, and we have got to decide as a group, as we always do when we do legislation, what we're going to do. Because it's a group. It's not just our kingdom versus their kingdom, or we'll get nothing done.
Not like the project isn't hard enough if it were just us.
Absolutely.
And now we have to do it from across
We
the
do.
river too, right?
Multi-million-dollar project,
Yep.
and you
Yeah.
had in all the stakeholders, including 2 different
And then you put in the environmental issues of
Sure.
where you move a pylon in the Columbia River, and then you're starting all over again. So yeah, it
And an
becomes.
international airport.
There you go, to boot.
Yes.
And height
Makes it-
restrictions.
Makes it more interesting.
It does.
Yeah, much more interesting.
Make it easy. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about transportation needs on Clark County highways without using the word bridge, unless you use the words Camas Slough with it. So, what other kinds of projects other than the Columbia River crossing?
Well, the ones that we share in common, the fairgrounds, the 179th is a
Yeah.
huge. We've tried as a group, we've tried to get that project moved up. It's funded, but we want that done earlier. We believe there's economic impact there, and I'm sure Representative Vick agrees. That's in his. I guess we almost share that, don't we?
We
do.
split
We
the
do.
freeway. Yeah.
Split the freeway.
Yeah.
That's a
Oh, yeah.
huge. I think it's a great issue. Expansion of Highway 14 in our area, even though will help, and it's on the docket. So we got a couple of good projects I think that are really important.
We're gonna see improvements to 503, not only because of the rock that fell into it, but the
That
other
was sort of unfortunate.
but other things going in there. I think not only are you going to see improvements to the road, but you're going to see safety improvements. And there's talk by WADOT of doing some sort of dividing median so that the number of fatal accidents decreases up there. But yeah, as we move up the freeway, there's a lot of big things. And 179th, the widening of 14 is going to be great for commute times.
It is.
That's going to put a third lane from 205 to 164th.
Correct,
Is that right?
correct.
Yeah.
And it's going to unfortunately
mess.
bump the
It's a mess.
Camas Slough Bridge a little bit, but we can come back and get to that.
But we do need to address the Camas Slough Bridge
We
too.
do.
I mean,
We do.
that's another.
But the magnitude of 179th, I mean, it's not just people going to the fairs and
No.
the exhibition hall. The residential opportunities that are going to open up there are massive. The commercial opportunities are massive. And that whole Discovery Corridor is going to be able to really get the life it needs. That's jobs here. That's good paying jobs here. When we get the capital budget figured out, we've got $5 million in there to start the Clark College project up at Ridgefield. I mean, that corridor and the high-tech manufacturing and corporate atmosphere it can create is going to be massive, and it all just starts with this little $50 million freeway interchange. But that's going to be, you might not notice it on your commute, but you're going to notice the impacts of it long term.
Yeah.
And we have sent, I think, 2 letters now asking that project to be moved up. That if anybody,
it's a ways down the road, isn't it?
it is, and if anybody falls out of the queue and can't, has funding issues or whatever, we want that project, and we will do whatever we can to get that project.
I
early.
believe the design funding comes in the next biennium, and then the construction funding starts the biennium after that.
I was thinking,
remember right.
21
So,
timeframe.
yeah.
And it's interesting because I actually live not too far from Union Road, where Union comes in 179.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you, just like Brandon mentioned, the housing is exploding right now. So, I mean, you look at that. I've met with the CREDC, asked them, kind of show me where some of the shovel-ready land is. I mean, that 179th area is right. It's ready. So,
I think they did the sewer a couple of years ago, didn't they?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right.
Or at
And-
least
and
the
very-
main trunk, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
very happy
I
about
remember
that too. I know
Mhm.
Ridgefield has really been glad to see that. So, I mean, that whole area is just, it's starting to explode. So we have to have that infrastructure ready to go. So we're not anywhere like we are on some of the other
There's a
connector projects.
number of smaller transportation projects that were worked into the queue too, but those are the big ones for sure.
Yeah.
Craig, anything?
Oh, those are most of my questions. So I want to know about that stupid Highway 14 thing.
Is that where you live?
No, my in-laws live out
Oh,
there.
yeah.
I live in your district. I live up by Kleinline Pond.
Oh yeah. yeah.
So anyway,
Well, we're almost neighbors
so
then, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, we used to live out by where Vicky's lives, but it was getting too crowded, so we moved over by
Yeah.
Kleinline Pond.
So I live by your
So-
outlaws.
You okay.
I do.
You moved
Okay.
to the ever shrinking Philida, huh?
Never shrink. Yeah, I'm in Florida by this much, so I have a very snooty.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
exciting. So anyway.
Great. Well, I guess I don't have anything
So, is there anything else that we should share with our readers?
I just, maybe it's a self-brag, I don't know, but two things I worked on this year that I'm hugely excited about. We got the right to try legislation passed. It passed under Senator Jamie Peterson's name.
That was one of your bills.
But man,
right?
I worked on that thing for 2 years, and I am so glad the policy's in place, regardless of the recognition. And the second is, does have my name, but it's the ability for businesses to use crowdfunding, whether it's to start up, whether it's to grow, whether it's to expand, allowing the novice investor like me and the novice business owner to go out there and raise money in a non-traditional way that a bank might not be able to offer is something that I think is going to lead to big growth, especially in areas like ours where we have small tech startups. We don't have big angel investors. I think that's something that we worked hard on all year, and I think is going to be a big economic benefit to our area.
Representative Vick left off one of his bills that I really like, actually, and it was the experimental drug bill. I think, isn't it, where you can try
That was the right to try.
Right to try.
Yeah,
Is that what that's called?
yeah.
I know it under different names. That's a phenomenal bill, and
You
I
worked on that for a while.
Huh?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I so appreciate that. I sit on the healthcare committee, and that's an important issue that I want people to have the right to do. Wasn't my bill, but the assessment bill that came out this year for allowing students to have an option out of high-stake testing is a huge issue that I worked extremely hard on. I have a dead bill that I will work on again next year, which is raising the smoking age to 21, which Representative Vick doesn't like, several of my caucus members don't like. It's an issue I believe in, and so I will work on that issue again of trying to raise the smoking age in our state to 21. I think it would have passed the House, but it would have gone over to the Senate and died. So I've got some work to do in the Senate on a health care issue. And to me, it's an interesting issue because we really don't think we're going to save money by having people quit smoking. And I've got to get with the Office of Financial Management and explain how health care works.
Did I see some of the state had raised the smoking age?
Absolutely.
Recently?
Everyone around us has.
Everybody else did. Okay.
Everyone around us has figured it out but us.
Well, there you go.
But my party will say they're Democratic states, Harris. What are you doing? So.
Well, if Idaho goes that way, you'll have an argument.
There you go, and they're talking it. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad to be through my first term, especially given this session. But I was thankful to have a bill pass on my first session, and that was to help disabled veterans with a $2,500 sales tax exemption on adaptive housing. So they have to qualify for one of two federal grants, federal adaptive housing grants, but if they do, then they can qualify for this as well. So it's a great opportunity to be able to give back to our veterans who have certainly given so much for us and our country and freedoms. And
So that would be for disabled veterans.
that is for disabled veterans, that's correct.
Okay.
And so was excited to do that, and I'm really thankful to be able to serve the citizens of the 17th in Olympia. It was, I was obviously very excited going into session. It got very real quickly going into session, but I'm thankful for the way that we can work together, certainly as a caucus, but even on a bipartisan aspect. I was really glad I was able to start a bipartisan caucus to fight sex trafficking. And I was introduced to Representative Tina Orwell, who has been a big champion for sex trafficking prevention legislation. So we connected, and she said, "Man, if you'd start a caucus, yeah, I'd be happy to be a part of that." So that's really where that started, and we have about 10 members now, from both sides of the aisle that are actively participating. So, it just goes to show you can really get a lot of things done. Building relationships. So I'm excited to work on some legislation in those regards as well next year.
One thing that Brandon mentioned earlier, and I think it's really important, I think this session we worked more collaboratively as a coalition in Southwest Washington than we ever have. And I think what started that was the bridge idea, but really then it blossomed into the capital budget, which we don't have, but I know that we will, that we met on a very regular basis as the 14th, the 49th, the 17th, and the 18th, and had some good meetings. And really, I think in the years that I've been in the legislature, this has probably been the most collaborative we've ever been.
And I don't want to end on a sour note, but if there's something your readers should pay attention to is pretty massive court cases going to be coming out of Seattle with whether or not cities can impose an income tax. You know,
Yeah,
I wrote the bill to prohibit it. Paul was my second.
What'd you get me into, Vic?
But
No,
you know, I mean,
good bill.
But if you're talking about
Great
issues
bill.
that could wind up landing in our laps to deal with, that's going to be huge. I firmly believe it'll be thrown out, but I haven't agreed with everything our court's done in the past. So that's just something we got to keep our eye on. And I mean, we know it's not the desire of Southwest Washington, and it's going to be a battle moving. Even if the case fails, it's going to be a battle moving forward. So something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can all safely say the voters of Washington have spoken very loud and clear several times about, you know,
Regarding
income
Income
tax.
tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not something they're looking for. So
Yeah.
we'll work to support their votes.
Well, thank you all for coming in.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.